So like Luke Azevedo, Commissioner, Film and Television, Economic Development for Alberta, correct?
Calgary.
Just Calgary itself.
So the way that it works is
you should be on Alberta, the way we've been having our chats here. Yeah.
The way that it works is there's three commissioners. So my title is Commissioner of Film, Television, Creative Industries. So I look after anything that, whether it's gaming, interactive digital media, film and television, and then we interact with the community when it comes to music, when it comes to any other activity that's entertainment based or that at some point comes across my desk. We do the permitting, we do direct contact with studios and with potential clients, and then we do digital photo packages, we do the scouting, we do all of the pieces so that we can have a sort of a cradle to grave kind of scenario with the packages. So
right.
And so the way that it splits up is that we have our Alberta Film Commissioner, which is Mark Ham, and then we have the ESIO office, which looks after everything Red Deer North, and then the CED office is the Film Commission that looks after everything from Red Deer South.
Gotcha. Okay. And so when you guys are doing some amazing things over in Calgary right now, let's talk a little bit about some of that stuff. You guys have got these 3 stages, and they're how old are those now?
2014 is when they when we started building. 2016 is the first year that William F. White came on and the first project that we took on.
Right. And you guys have some pretty wicked projects going through. You guys are full in lieu of COVID. You guys are full right now.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit before we get into what you guys have built, but how you got there in regards to COVID, your guys' plan to still be moving while we're in this state from an economy and like a world perspective.
Well, it's interesting because we were in India at the beginning of the year, in February, March, and we were there for a variety of things. We were looking at tech talent, we were looking at post-secondaries, foreign direct investment, and part of that was film and television. So as we went from Delhi into Bangalore, and then from Bangalore into Mumbai, which is where Bollywood is, we got into the film and television component at the end. And one of the biggest festivals that they have there was at that time. And I was able to be there with some high-profile folks, the mayor of the city and the heads of the University of Calgary, as well as Mount Royal College, and then representation from Bow Valley College, and then some of my cohorts from work. So we went into the market. This has been my second time there. We went into the market from the perspective of trying to engage relationships that we had created previously and to try to develop new relationships as we moved along. So it went well. On the 8th of March, we were coming back, and we were pretty concerned because of what we were hearing globally, airports starting to have issues routing people through, flights being canceled. COVID was the highlight. And in Mumbai at the time, there was 4 cases the day that we left, or at least stated 4 cases.
Yeah.
So that next few days, had we not gone out of there at that point, could have been very difficult for us to get back. So once we hit the ground here, it was about 4 days before we were told that we were leaving the office and starting to work from home, which put us in an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Most of us had at some point or another experienced some work from home kind of environments, the work shift kind of situation, but none of us was actually expecting what was to happen. At that point, on the 13th of March, we were told that we'd be count on a couple of weeks. Well, then it became a month, then it became 2 months, and all of a sudden we are where we are. And so from our perspective, what we needed to do was to guide ourselves in a way that was going to ensure that we were going to stay relevant, ensure that Alberta would stay top of mind, and ensure that we could continue to communicate with our friends, our relationships, our key stakeholders globally, then North America-wise, and then as well as our locals. Because what we didn't want to do was to put all of our efforts on the global interaction and not pay attention to the folks that are here with us, that are our partners in production.
Yeah.
So we started sending out emails, just checking in, just making sure everybody was okay, identifying that if there was anything we could help with, whether it was film and television related or not, that we were in a position in Alberta at that time that we could, if there was anything we could do, we were happy to do it.
Yeah.
And then we continued to ensure that our local production community knew that we were there for them as well. So anything that we could do as we continued through, whether they were working or not working, let us know and we would engage.
Yeah.
So that was the start of it. And then we started to put together a plan. So now you've got travel monies that you're not going to be able to utilize. So what do you do with it? Well, you ensure that you're doing as much sales, advertising, marketing in the appropriate way as we possibly could. So we took on some higher profile advertising and marketing opportunities that we wouldn't have been able to do in other times. And so we very much targeted specific areas. So if Cannes was going, and we had normally been there year after year, had relationships that we wanted to make sure were going to be maintained, we invested in doing a webinar and doing some advertising. Same thing at TIFF. We'd created Calgary Day, where we had an opportunity to put videos that were about the city, about the province, about all of the aspects of film and television that we felt were appropriate to be communicating. We then did webinars that were designed around our local producers and our local crews and our development areas, and we had those conversations to the world. And when you have an audience of 70 to 80,000 people, that let's say even a tenth of that attend, that is a significant impact, and kept us, in front of folks without having to be in market or without being able to be in market. So we did that, and then we started having conversations with the city. We're the one window access for permitting and such out of Calgary. So the intent was to ensure that the conversations there were that as we got to the point where we could activate and start working again, how do we ensure that we meet all the metrics from the, first and foremost, without a doubt, was all the safety protocol that needed to be in place for us to continue. And it wasn't about how much money you could generate. It was about keeping people safe. If we're going to be working, we wanted to make sure that a project could start and could end, and that everybody on those sets felt comfortable, was adhering to the provincial and municipal protocols, and then adhering to the protocols that were in place for that particular group. So the Western Canadian Commercial Producers Association came up with guidelines right at the beginning for all commercials. So we were hoping that everybody would adhere to those. As far as our production for series and feature film, those were in place and had been vetted and by the unions, the guilds, the associations, and we are neither anybody's moral barometer nor are we the police on this. But it was important for me and our team to get onto as many sets as we continue to do as possible, so that the end result is this: is we became more knowledgeable. We understood the processes, we understood what was going on. Should there be any kind of issues, that we'd know how to react and be the most helpful we possibly could to those productions. So that's how we've engaged. And now we've started to see, we saw productions that were in pause, re-engage and come out successfully. We've seen new productions engage and are looking to be ending successfully. And we're constantly communicating, whether it's with the associations, the unions and guilds, or with the production community, to ensure it's all there. When we're talking about, there was another gap that came into play around insurance. So how do our Canadian producers and production companies re-engage into the industry with all of their content creation if they couldn't get insurance? So the Canadian government stepped up and did that. We sat on a couple of national committees that were there to identify the issues, identify potential solutions, and then be part of the group that presented forward to government and asked for the things that were necessary for this $9 billion industry to get back and reinvigorate it into the system. So lots of activity.
No kidding. Talk about busy. It hasn't stopped for you guys.
No.
So, with we'll try not to dwell too much on COVID, because I really want to talk about the industry as a whole and what it means to Alberta and the country, North America. But what about the partnerships? Has COVID resulted in opening some new doors? You guys have done a lot of work with the airports to make sure testing was available with health services. Can you talk about some of these partnerships that have come about? You guys are really putting staples in to be the people to be talking about. You're creating the model that people need to be following. That's really awesome. Would that be accurate in saying that statement?
It is, but I think it's us being able to work with the community. So being part of a bigger group that engages. So whether it's talking nationally, whether it's talking internationally or then bringing it back to the local community, which is, from our perspective, is the core here. If we can't create an environment that enables international or national activity within our region, then we haven't done our job.
Yeah.
So the idea for us was when the government announced that there was a pilot program that was going to happen at the international airport, we wanted to ensure that we were having conversations with AHS, with the Alberta government, Alberta Film, to ensure that everybody was aware that we were open for business, that we were an industry that was supported to be open by government, that protocols were in place to ensure that once somebody comes into Calgary, does their test, comes back negative in 48 hours, that they can engage, does a second test 6 or 7 days later, and then can continue to go. That is for the next 27 weeks, is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
That puts about a 6-month window where we have some opportunities that maybe the rest of the country doesn't have. So that was an option. It wasn't the only thing. It's not, it is not the be all end all. There's a lot of components that go together to make you a safe and welcoming community that's film friendly, but also adhering to all of the safety aspects that are necessary.
Yeah.
So we started to have conversations with the studios. We started to have conversations with our local community. We had started having conversations with the city, ensuring permitting get done, ensuring that all of those pieces were in place. And obviously our advocacy work that continues on a consistent basis, which is trying to enhance our ability to be more globally competitive from the perspective of incentives.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. So the advocacy and staying, you said earlier at the beginning, staying relevant, staying part of the conversation. You were talking off camera just about you're always in market. You're out there, you're talking, and you're selling Alberta. And that's something that seems pre-COVID has always been a challenge and has always been a relevant. The primary topic is just like keep Alberta in the back of your head if you have any kind of production because we're ready. So let's talk about some of the work that you've been doing in regards to that pre-COVID and during now about staying, relevant and the advocacy for Alberta. How does that kind of process work?
Well, it's interesting because this is a massive shift for us, right? So in market between 5 to 6 months out of last year, and then all of a sudden it comes to a dead stop. So how do you ensure that the relationships that you've built over these last, whatever amount of years, that you can continue to have those engagements, you can continue to have those conversations that are candid and open about where our opportunities and advantages are, and also where our lackings are, so that we can learn as we move forward. So, there's about 4 questions that get asked now. Last year it was 3, now it's 4. The first question that comes out of any one that you talk about is how safe is your area? Are you COVID experienced? Have you had projects that have gone that have been successful? What are the pieces that are in place for testing? Do you have the capacity? Is your incentive still stable? Those kind of things. So you're talking about a lot of that. Second is and what seems to be what everybody highlights as the most important question, which this year is the second most, is around incentives. How globally competitive are you? How sure are those incentives that we know that we apply and can get them? And at the end of the day, how do those engage with your marketplace? Are you cost effective? Are you in a position where you can be competitive to other jurisdictions globally? It's not just North America,
right.
Globally, and make it work for us. So we talk a little bit about that. There's the exchange rate that comes, since about 70% of our foreign production is coming from the States and mostly out of Los Angeles. There's exchange rate that's important. Secondly, it's the incentives here, the 22% all spend that we have here, up to a maximum of $10 million per project. Then you talk about the federal incentives, which on a foreign production will give you 16% labor-based tax credit that can be applied to every province, the same way, and enhances our ability to be more competitive for mostly for talent and crew that you're bringing into your region that aren't specifically from your region. So the provincial credits kick in there. So, as we start to have the conversations on projects to a certain level, we're extremely competitive. After that, things start to shift a bit because with the cap on our incentives, it makes it more difficult to be competitive on the larger projects. Not to say we don't get those projects, but there's very few producers or directors that can dictate where a project goes if they're not their incentivization program is not competitive. There are some that can, and we've seen it, but the majority of the folks that you're talking to, at the end of the day, and it's specifically now with the amount of money that is necessary to be invested into projects to keep them safe and to keep them have the COVID protocol that's appropriate, you've got to be able to be competitive from that perspective. Then we start talking about crew base. And it's crew and talent, in front and behind the camera. So how good is your crew? Well, we're world class. I mean, we've got crew that you can compare to anyone anywhere on the planet, and the quality of the work shows. I mean, the amount of accolades, awards, and nominations that have happened in this province are huge. So there's, from that perspective, you're there. Then it's the depth of your crew. How many crews do you have in your jurisdiction? How many projects can you do at any given time, so that we know we have not just an incentive to come into your region, but can maximize those incentives through utilizing what is probably the most extensive investment, which is labor. And then they work from there. Do you have, if we've got locations, do you have equipment? Do you have all of the infrastructure that's necessary? Purpose-built stages, warehouse facilities that can be retrofitted. All of these things that are important to ensure that they can create their project in the manner that they want to. Everybody knows about our vistas. We got the prairies, the badlands, the foothills, the mountains, and 2 municipalities of over 1 million people, all within a 3-hour radius. That's a globally unique situation to be in. So the vistas, the backdrops are all there. The incentives, working with government to try to make ourselves more globally competitive, which is great. That's part of the advocacy work. We have a government that's supportive of our industry, so we'll see where it goes this year. And then from there, it's ensuring that those 7 standing sets and the infrastructure that's here, and whether it's the film center or whether it's non-purpose built retrofitted facilities. How do we ensure that when people are in there that they can create the environment that they need, so that they can isolate the project, keep it as safe as possible, implement protocols that are specifically directed at keeping everyone safe, and then have an outcome which is a great project. And so we've, from our perspective, we've got a huge amount of positives that we're trying to actively ensure that people understand, and that they know that they can come here and it's a simple, film-friendly, welcoming environment for them, even during these challenging times.
So from the incentives, like where can we look at opportunities to be more competitive on a world stage? I mean, we do have the credits program and whatnot, but is there, now you're saying up to a certain point where we can be competitive, and then after a dollar figure we kind of fall off. Are these areas a big opportunity? I mean, there's an advocacy that you guys are working on to make it. This is a primary industry of benefit for our province and for the country. We need to open these doors a little bit more. How does that conversation kind of get into reality?
Well, I think, as I said, I think that this government is supportive. They see these industries like this and the gaming and interactive digital media industries, the technology industries, whether it's ag tech or tech in gaming. I mean, it's there's always the challenges for us is having a pipeline that's big enough of talent that we can, the majority of it trying to be local talent that people can hire, whether it is coming out of a post-secondary or a work environment where you have those skill sets, or bringing in people that from other underemployed industries that we can then pivot and retrain into areas that they can be taken in. I mean, you think about what film and television needs. You need electricians, you need carpenters, you need painters, hair and makeup, you need all of them. So there is other industries in our province that have very talented folks that at this point are looking at our industry as an opportunity. So that's one of the pieces. And then
that's a big conversation happening now because of COVID and job changes and
absolutely
shifts. So yeah, that's a huge part of that conversation.
And as well as what's happened to our economy as we've watched. And it's not just, everybody says oil and gas. Well, it's not just oil and gas. It's all the peripheral industries that are also impacted
hands down
from oil and gas.
Money flow is money flow at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so for us, there's a few things that really fit well with the government's plan, whether at the municipal level with Calgary and the New Economy, or whether it's at the provincial level with with the new Ministry of Jobs, Economy, and Innovation.
Right. Yeah.
So from our perspective, how we align with government and ensure that we're on the same path is extremely important. The advocacy work is that for us to be competitive, we have to be competitive nationally. And if we're competitive nationally, that means we're competitive globally. We don't have to have the highest incentives. What we need to have is incentives that are seen as stable and competitive. Yeah. And competitive means that we need to be able to go after the major projects. What you see happening next door, for example, whereas you talk about Alberta last year doing around $300 million in activity, which is a good impact piece. But you look next door, look west, and you see a $4 billion industry, where you see 5,000 to 6,000 people working in an industry here, direct and indirect. You're seeing 75,000 working in British Columbia. And then you're the same thing in Ontario and Quebec. We're the fourth largest production location in the country. And you're talking about coming down from billions of dollars to hundreds of millions of dollars.
Gap.
Yeah, and the opportunities are there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the timing for it right now, is that, think about what just happened in the last 7 to 8 months. The highest consumption of content ever in our history. And so what happens at that point? There needs to be the replenishment of that content, first and foremost. And then there needs to be the second piece of it, which is how do we do additional content and ensure that we never get put in a position again where there isn't enough content to satisfy the consumption that's happening in the public. So I think as you look across the planet, streaming has become the manner in which the product is distributed. Obviously there's still some traditional manners, and we see some projects still going to theater, but based on the environment that we're in right now and our reality, it's reduced substantially. So now it's not changing how production is done for the screen, but it is changing how production is done technologically and how those outcomes are. So where is the end audience? Well, that end audience is global. And that's not just for the streamers in the studios, that's also for our local production community. Being able to tell those Alberta stories to the world is as important today, as potentially more important today than it has been in the past. Yeah. So how do we ensure that as we're attracting that foreign production and growing that aspect of the industry, that we look at our local production community? I mean, we're sitting in an environment here today where you've had to invest a significant amount of money to be able to function at the level that you do, as have other production and post facilities throughout the province. How do we ensure that in good faith we can turn to them and say, it's worth the investment and you should grow it because there's going to be work coming in here that's going to allow you to grow your business, hire more people, and invest back into Alberta? And so from our perspective, to be able to do that, we have to be competitive, because if we can attract the work, that means that people are going to be able to work on larger projects. They're going to be working on more projects. There's going to be a significant need because the production companies are coming into jurisdictions and now they want to be there as long as they can. They don't want to be moving from location to location within a certain jurisdiction.
Like a radius.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But going from country to country to country to country gets much more difficult than it used to be.
For sure.
And each one of these countries will have different protocols, they'll have different mandates, they'll have a variety of different things that becomes it's not just the expense component, it's what kind of situation are you putting your talent, your crew, your executives in as you do that moving around.
Yeah.
So if they can come into a jurisdiction and they know they can start and they can finish, and then in between that they have the ability to be incentivized to stay there long term, fantastic. The other thing that's core for us here as part of our growth strategy is to ensure that our in front of the camera talent is also taken into that consideration around this. So how do we get larger parts, more roles? How do we adapt to the fact that there's potentially less background actors because of our situation with COVID, and how long does this go on for? So how do we ensure that those folks that potentially are more of us now, because what's happening in the theater areas and the live performance areas, those folks hopefully will now transition into film and TV more consistent basis that will allow us to have a greater talent pool for production to pick from. So we're working with ACTRA, we work with the DGC, with the Teamsters, with IATSE to ensure that as we're having these conversations, that everybody has a voice and everybody's in the mix. And then you add one more lens to it, which is how do we ensure that our BIPOC community is also has a voice at a much more significant level than they have in the past. And how, when we're looking at how we're growing industries, that all of these things are taking into consideration. It may seem really complex right at the moment, but we've got to adjust to the reality that we're given. And from our perspective here, no matter what our incentives were, no matter what potential obstacles were in our way to be able to grow the industry and to keep it going, that's what we do. We're constantly talking about what the next phase could look like, but we don't forget that we're still here today. People still need to work and people still need to be safe. So how do we manage that?
And we have some massive feathers in our cap that we need to really, I feel like the general populace don't know of. Like when we look at, you talked earlier about the accolades that Alberta's gotten in regards to awards and Grammys. We've had some phenomenal films here. I mean, everyone was raving when Jumanji was being filmed up in Banff. Hey, these guys are in town and stuff like that. But we have like Inception. We've had I go back to Unforgiven because that's an old dad's film, right? But we've had some phenomenal projects come through that have been ridiculously successful that I don't think get the when we talk about advocacy, they don't get the shout out to the mountains that, hey, that happened here in Alberta enough. We've had some phenomenal actors that have come through here that have come out of Alberta and of Canada that are on some internationally known shows. When that kind of advocacy starts to happen, what does it look like when we say we talk about Jumanji? I'm going to get a little bit fun on us here a little bit. So, so when say when Jumanji comes through. What is it? What are the steps that we need or can be taken when we have these guys doing interviews and we're talking to them saying hey, you're in Alberta right now. How do you like it, Dwayne? What's it been like for you? And having those kinds of voices talk about the experiences they're having in our province. How do we go about getting more of that kind of stuff happening? And is that possible?
It is. It's absolutely possible. That particular piece, and I'm going to talk to it just for a short period of time, but there's other ones that are much more prominent.
Okay.
So when we talk about Jumanji, the big thing there was that everybody knew there had been some kind of a press leak, and everybody knew that they were here.
Gotcha.
So they were in a very contained environment for a short period of time. What they did with their social media and all of the interviews that they were doing globally, that was unpaid. They went and did this in a manner that was because they were enjoying the environment. Now, obviously, The Rock had been here before, had been on the practice squad for the Stampeders, had done a variety of things, so he knew the area.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is, and I see this on Scouts when you're bringing producers or directors or executives into the region that have never been here, you take them to the top of Fortress Mountain, or you take them into Kananaskis area, or you take them into the prairies of the Badlands, and they're amazed. These are there's times that we're showing photos from some of these locations that people are like, is that green screen? What did you guys do?
Right.
No, this is our environment. So that's number one. Second is ensuring that anybody that comes into the region, whether they're at that level of a star or not, have a great experience here.
Yeah.
So that we're welcoming, they embrace our Western heritage and our hospitality, and that they, at the end of the day, they're going home to talk about how great it is here. That you can't buy that kind of advertising.
No kidding. Yeah.
Then secondly, and what needs to be talked about probably more than anything is that there's a misconception that the cities are where all of the spends are and what's going to benefit most from these productions. And it's not specifically the case. The majority of the production that is done outside of the cities. It's done in our rural areas. So when you have a project like a Ghostbusters that is going into Drumheller or Didsbury, or projects that are going out to Fort Macleod or High River or Okotoks or all of these areas across the province, the amount of money spent in there is massive. And it's a short period of time. They come in, they spend on hotels, they spend on food, they spend on all of the goods and services that they need. They're hiring Alberta crews. One of the things that also is not that known and needs to, I guess our story has to be better told, is that the incentives that are offered to do anything in Alberta have to be spent in Alberta.
Right.
So what happens is that, so a project comes in and they've got a $10 million project. Well, they know at the end of it, if that $10 million spend is here, that they're going to get $2.2 million back. Okay? Goods, services, and labor. That's what it's attributed to. But here's the process that goes, is they come into the region, they hire, they spend the money, they produce the project, they give accolades, or there's conversations happening everywhere around it. They then do a third-party audit. That audit then goes to the government, who does an audit on their submission. From there and only there, after the money has been spent, the production has been done, everybody's been paid, do they look at the outcome and say, okay, you get money back on that. So we're not giving money for anybody to be spending anywhere else. We're incentivizing them. And at the percentage that we're at, we're in the middle of the pack there somewhere. We're not the highest percentages and we're not the lowest percentages. What changes for us is when we start having conversations around the major impact projects that come in, and that could be $100 or $150 million. How do we ensure that we can attract more of those? And for most jurisdictions, one of the things that we look at is series are much more attractive to jurisdictions than feature films. Feature films are fantastic, and you want them. Great resume builders for crew, great investment, short period of time where there's a lot of money that comes in, and the outcome is if the accolades that go with that and the exposure as a jurisdiction, it's fantastic. But series are the gift that keeps giving. They're here over and over.
Year after year, right? Yeah.
Heartland,
right.
14 years. We're doing right now, producing our second year of Tribal. Tin Star was here for 2 years. Hell on Wheels was here for 6 years. I mean, you can go through all of these, one after the other. You've got Jan, that's here consistently. Winona, that has done 4 years, was in the Calgary Film Center as COVID came in. So you've got a variety of projects that you can count on from year to year.
Yeah.
And then you're out trying to bring as many new projects as you come in, that you can then see the growth that happens within the province. And the more that you do that, the more crews you're hiring that have full-time work, the more investment that's coming, foreign direct investment that's coming into your jurisdiction that has an impact on your economy. And what you hope for at some point is that there is one of the majors that sees it as a location of choice for a slate of projects and potentially creates a hub in your jurisdiction. It's starting to happen in different parts of the world. And if you're seen as a safe, high-quality production jurisdiction with ease of access to people and infrastructure, and your incentives are stable, it's a huge impact. And when we look at film and TV, and we look at gaming and interactive digital media, these are areas that are some of the highest growth areas anywhere. And so if we are able to attract more of our share of that, the interest is not to become a Vancouver or a Toronto. The interest is to be Alberta and to really focus on our opportunities and our advantages. Being a billion-dollar industry is not far down the road if we have all of the pieces in place that allow us to attract the kind of production that we're looking for.
A couple comments to what you said. A, that's how most industries should be run, where if you're going to come here and you're going to use our resources, the money's got to stay here. And then, that's a conversation that I've been thinking about and having with other people in regards to a bunch of other industries. So it's great to hear that this industry is getting it right in that sense. The economic boost that you're talking about, when these guys go to Drumheller, I mean, that stimulus that goes into that area of the province is so huge and so long-term beneficial. And like you said, it breeds, that money stays, it breeds for more projects, more incentives. They can develop more so that there's more to come back to if that project decides to come back. So many awesome things in that sense. So that's really cool to hear about. One thing I was reading about not long ago was a lot of these it's like film set tours. So like you say, Ghostbusters, there's a lot of people that film tourism that travel to go and look at spaces that where things were shot, things were created, and there's actually like a small little industry built around that's quite successful. So it's really cool to see that. And you were right, again, when you go back to what you were saying with, we've got all the threats, we've got the prairies, got the balance, got the mountains. We're kind of like we are a very unique spot compared to the rest of the world. And it's cool when you can take these big actors that have been all over the place, they still come here and they go, wow, haven't seen this before. But I've been everywhere else, but I haven't seen this before. That is a cool feather in Alberta's cap for sure. Mm-hmm. How about when it comes to resources? So let's go back to how is our labor force when it comes to, do we have enough? Is there more room for that right now? Resources and equipment, production houses. Do we need more production houses? We're in an age now, especially with COVID, that the digital content, this is between entertainment and communication. It's all in video. It's all in production. It's all in that direction. And I think that we're seeing such a result with how COVID has been treated and how we are consuming content that we're in a content shortage. It's not one of those renewable resources. You have to keep building it. You have to keep replenishing it. This industry can only get bigger, and it can only go up. So we know that there's opportunities for growth. How are we sitting right now as a province and as this industry in our province? Do we need more production houses? Do we need more talent? Where are we with that?
We need more talent and more crew.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think what has happened to us over the years is because of the growth that's happened in Vancouver and in Toronto and even in Manitoba. Mm-hmm. You've seen some of our talent migrate to those areas.
Right.
So you start talking about what's happening in BC, for example. The commentary is that there's 7 full crews out there that are Albertans. And so what part of our strategy is to try to migrate some of that talent back, as well as take our post-secondaries, and there's many throughout the province. We generate 3,200 students coming out of the post-secondaries a year with a creative industries moniker or attachment to their diploma or their certificate. And where do those people go? They go to other jurisdictions. So we need to ensure that we're creating enough jobs to keep them here, and as well as looking at it from the perspective of how we grow our crew base. So when everybody talks about the growth of an industry, money becomes the first conversation. And absolutely incentives are what's going to attract and get you to competitive. But there's other parts to it, right? You need to have the human resources that go along with it. And that means behind and in front of the camera. Yeah. And so great crew base, we'd like to see, as we're getting more production, we want to see the crew base grow so that we're not importing people into back into the province, that we have people here and we're growing it. So the students coming through, our mentors are here and they're helping them create those environments, whether it's the unions and guilds and other folks that are creating those training opportunities. And then you start talking about the migration back, that base coming through, and then potentially the retrain from other industries that we can bring in as well. So you need your incentives. You need your human resources, and then you need your infrastructure, right? The Calgary Film Center, there's warehouses, but now how do we increase that so that it becomes, the conversation is always about a 3-legged stool, right? It's incentives, it's human resources, and infrastructure. And you've got to grow them at the same time in unison, or you can't compete because it's...
And have one leg longer than the other.
Well, if you have a lacking in some place and the others are affected. So from our perspective, what we look at is sustainable. Long term.
Yeah.
So what can we do as a sector, working with government, working with industry, everyone with the same voice of growth, and that growth is going to impact the economy. It's going to impact jobs. It's going to impact the construction industry that then will be making more facilities. It's going to impact people that are working in the sector now, people that aren't working in the sector that have lost their jobs and are potentially looking at transitioning. Yeah. How do we ensure that those opportunities are here so that growth happens and it is long-term sustainable? Yeah. I mean, you start looking at what we were the first jurisdiction in Canada to have a film commission and an incentive. And we start looking at what's happened around us since that period of time is our concentration wasn't in this knowledge-based industry or this technological industries. We were grounded in our resource-based industry, which for the last 60 years has created Alberta and given all the opportunities that it has. Mm-hmm. And it's not an if or and. It's got to be created in unison. So yes, resource-based environment still important to us. Agricultural still important to us. But so is film and TV, so is tourism, so are all these other sectors, the fintech world, all of these things that are necessary so that we're moving in the direction that the world is moving.
They all feed off of one another.
They do. They do. There is technology that was designed by creative industries used in the oil and gas industry and vice versa.
Yeah.
Right? And as well as, you start seeing how the post-secondaries interact and what they are creating. The amount of seats that they're making now to have more tech talent coming out of our post-secondaries. And then the private sector. You look at scenarios like Platform and others that are also devising ways and means to grow that aspect of our talent as well. We've learned a lot over the years about what the needs are, and and how to implement those needs. And I got to say that there's the biggest thing, taking if money was equal everywhere, the biggest thing is going to be talent. It's the people, and we have an abundance of folks here that are extremely talented, and we have an opportunity to help them move forward and to grow, and which in turn is great for our province.
Well, and Alberta's always been renowned. Canada's been renowned for having a great people and great personalities, and we're friendly, and so when you can provide quality on top of that customer service, that interaction, that enjoyment, you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
That's the one thing about film and television that's always fascinated the heck out of me, is that it, like you said, it touches everything.
Yeah.
We've got, you go to BC, you got people in the dive industry because they're working on diving because they got to do underwater stuff with this. You got people in the animal industry working with pets. It touches everything, skiing, tourism, all that. It's everywhere, and it's one of those just universal. So you make a great point in the fact that if everything's moving up, everything will go up at the same time. Everybody's scratching one another's back and they're going through. So that's super great to hear. Thank you so much, Luke, for coming in and talking to us today. This was fantastic. Absolutely. Yeah, it's so great to hear, great news, and that there's great hope for this industry. But again, because it touches everything, it's great hope for everything.
Of course.
And so I think that there's nothing but positivity going forward. 2021 is just another year that's it's ripe, filled with opportunities if we're willing to identify them and go after them. So again, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
You betcha.